Starling Klippel with the Public Works Department and some information on preparing for the storms ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sterling Klippel. I'm with LA County Public Works, and we have a storm forecast coming up this week. We're expecting rain starting Wednesday through Friday, with the heavier rain expected to occur on Thursday around noon to Friday around 6 a.m. And we're expecting 1 to 3 inches. And with that, that's for the coast and valleys, and then 3 to 6 inches in the foothills and mountains. With this rainfall, we are expecting some isolated mud flows. Streets could be blocked, and there is a potential, for mud in the streets and in certain areas. As the county flood control district, we have assessed all the county flood control facilities, and they are ready and prepared to protect the public, protect property, and to protect the natural environment. At this point, we have put out K-rails in key spots to cover areas that aren't covered by our debris basins and dams. We have put out 8,000 sandbags, and we also have free of charge engineering mud flow advice. You could call our 1-800 number if you'd like to have a team come out and assess your property and make recommendations for mitigation measures such as sandbagging to protect doorways. And the goal is always to divert the flows around your home to the streets, not into your neighbors, but to the streets. And that number is 1-800-675-4357. And you'll talk to an operator, and we'll make an appointment to have a team come out and assess your property. And with that, end of report.
Thank you, Sterling. And we'll now transition to the question and answer portion of our evening. The following questions were submitted ahead of tonight's community meeting, and we will answer as many of them as we can in the allotted time. You may also submit a question during this meeting using the chat function on your screen. As a reminder, you can find answers to frequently asked questions on recovery.lacounty.gov/Altadena. And our first question is for Supervisor Barger. How are the members of the Altadena Recovery Commission being selected? Is there an application, and how long will the ARC be in commission for?
So, and I appreciate that question. ARC is going to be driven by the community, and there will be community representation on this advisory group. And if people from the community are interested in participating, they can contact my office. There's no formal application. They can contact my office by emailing Catherine at bos.lacounty.gov. Again, Catherine, Kathryn, at bos.lacounty.gov. And then we will be putting this list together, and I'll be ready to provide more information probably by the end of the week.
Thank you, Supervisor.
And the length of time, my goal is to get the rebuilding effort off the ground. And so I would say probably 5 years.
Thank you for that, Supervisor Barger. Our next question is for Colonel Saucer. Trucks with debris have been parked on North Los Robles. Will this be a regular thoroughfare for debris removal?
No, that's an excellent question, and thank you for that. So we have looked at all the residential streets in Altadena, and we've met as recently as this last weekend on Saturday. We had an extensive working group working through exactly how we're going to move these waste streams to the appropriate receiving facility, whether that's a landfill, a transfer station, or a recycling station. In particular with North Robles, I know I've looked at the overhead diagram of Altadena. I've been on the ground as well. And with local and state authorities, North Robles will be utilized for some of the debris streams. And so you will see traffic on North Robles. We're moving as quickly out of the residential streets as possible. and causing as little congestion as possible within the residential communities and getting onto county and state and federal roads, as like I said, as quickly as possible. But North Robles will be utilized for a portion of the waste stream as we kick off this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. And Supervisor Barger, we have another question for you. Will there be an independent investigation into the alleged difference in sheriff officers' response in protecting homes and property, preventing looting, and arresting looters in the East Altadena and West Altadena?
So I'm going to let the captain address that, but I do know that, and I've been out and talked to the sheriff's deputies that are out there patrolling, and they have caught looters and burglars that have gone on to people's property. Obviously, we will conduct an investigation if appropriate. But Captain Williams, I'd like you to answer that question because I know that the men and women are out there. I was up there this weekend and I'm seeing sheriff cars all over the community. So if you can kind of address that.
Sure, no problem. Yes, we've been out there equally throughout Altadena. We break down Altadena into certain sections, and each section, what we call reporting districts, get a certain number of deputies to respond to those areas and patrol those areas for an entire shift. And it's for both east side and west side equally. We also have the home check system in place. It's going very well. We have a lot of people that have signed up, and it keeps increasing every day, and that's Altadena Home Check at lasd.org. We have our helicopter and drone system in place just for all of Altadena, so it's spread equally throughout. We have increased patrols, increased number of personnel, and we'll continue to do the same thing for the near future.
Thank you, Captain Williams. Our next question is for the Colonel. For homes left standing after phase 2 of debris removal, we expect to have to do additional cleaning of HVAC, insulation, and soil. Who pays for this cleanup?
Yeah, so that's another excellent question. I've been out there in Altadena, and there's certainly standing homes in the vicinity of unfortunately destroyed homes. So for a case like that, the personal property debris removal program, certainly anyone can submit an ROE. I think many have heard that from LA County Public Works previously, but you can submit an ROE. It does not mean that you will be eligible for the program in general, and in general, because all the variables and specifics matter. But in general, if you do not have a destroyed structure, you will likely not be eligible for the private property debris removal program. That said, for those structures that are not eligible for PPDR, as we call it, yeah, they will not be eligible for the CORES piece of this, which is the debris cleanup. You could potentially go to your DRC and ask that question and look for assistance from FEMA, potentially your insurance company. But in terms of the actual program that the Corps executes, if it's not deemed eligible for the program, that would be not part of the program. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. And another question for you. What precautions do surviving homeowners need to take when their street or their neighbors' properties are having their debris cleared?
So, certainly a lot of variables related to this. Where is the debris cleanup occurring on your street? How close is your house to that specific debris cleanup? At certain points, it may be closer to your house than it is to the other portions of the house. I could tell you that's a risk assessment that every individual will have to make for themselves. What it will look like at our sites is that we absolutely do everything we can to minimize the transfer of particles into the air. We utilize what's called the wet method. Many of you have heard about that before. So on the site itself, we will wet all the fire ash debris before any activities begin to take place. This is post, any potential asbestos abatement processes, so on and so forth. But we utilize the wet method to keep particles out of the air. You'll see on our personnel on the site, because they're in the ash footprint, you will see them in appropriate personal protective equipment attire, and that would be gloves and a mask and a helmet and a suit and booties on because they're in the ash footprint. We also put air monitors on each of our employees that are in the ash footprint. And we have air monitors that are around the immediate work site that we're working on. And then lastly, we will have, occasionally, for every project, we will have a standoff air monitoring location as well. And we'll judge that based on existing standing structures. That is for not only our employees' safety, but it contributes to the overall public health information that we do provide to public health authorities. To the essence of your question, it is a risk assessment question. I would say if you have, for me personally, if I had ash debris occurring near my home, I would limit the amount of time that I am outside. I would likely keep my windows closed. But the Corps is going to absolutely defer to public health authorities on the ultimate recommendations for folks while these activities are taking place.
Thank you. And you spoke briefly on the topic of ash footprint, and we have a few questions for those, so I'm going to read those out. What is the definition of the ash footprint where debris will be removed? What happens to properties where all the structures are not destroyed? And if a home was destroyed, but the remaining garage, driveway, and trees don't go with the designs for the new homes, can the remaining structures or driveways be destroyed?
On the ash footprint, we get that question all the time. So there's not a strict definition. I'm not going to give you number of feet from the original wall of the house. It is a judgment call on the site with the debris professionals that we do have. In general, it'll be all the fire ash debris that we can see and where it is currently sitting on the ground. That is going to be considered the ash footprint. So depending on the winds, depending on the type of house, it was a 2-story house, it was a single-story house, the house actually collapsed a certain direction or not, that will create variability into the actual ash footprint. But it is where you see the ash that will be considered the ash footprint. To the actual question on what happens to properties that are not destroyed. So in your ROE, you are able to provide a sketch of your property and your parcel. In many cases, folks had 2 structures on that parcel. They might have had a detached garage that was not destroyed, but the home was destroyed, or vice versa. Any non-destroyed structure would not be eligible typically for the personal property debris removal program. It has to be a fire destroyed structure, and that is somewhat of a judgment call by the debris professionals that we do have, but that would be in consultation with the property owner. Typically, the other question about driveways and pools, driveways and pools typically are not part of the program. And so they are not fundamental to the foundation of the destroyed structure. So we would, in many cases, take a concrete saw, and if you had a pool and the deck to the pool connected into the foundation of the house and there was some sort of standoff, likely there would be a separation created with a concrete saw as we take out a foundation if you elect to take out the foundation. But pools are not eligible in this case, and flat concrete structures like driveways or sidewalks that came up to the front of the house, if they're not in the ash footprint, those would still be remaining as well. And they're not part of the program. So what we are trying to do for public health purposes, that's our original mission, is get the fire ash debris out of the location and the affected area of that fire ash debris. That's why the foundations are an elective process by the homeowner, and the surrounding soil in the fire ash debris footprint is also part of the program, and that would be eliminated down to 6 inches. So we would take 6 inches of soil in conjunction with the foundation, or if the property owner elects to keep the foundation, we would leave the foundation. Long answer, long-winded. I'm certainly happy to retouch on that as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just as a follow-up to that, on the other hand, will the Army Corps respect an owner's request to keep certain areas alone and not remove them, such as chimney stacks, pools, and decks, and not to damage any existing courtyard decks that are maybe still in good shape?
So in general, it's a human-to-human conversation 3 to 5 days out before we come on your property. There will be a conversation. You're not going to talk to a robot. You're not going to get a text message. You're not going to get an email. It'll be a human conversation, and we'll talk to you 3 to 5 days out. We'll ensure that you have the ability to be there on site before we come. In particular to chimneys. Chimneys are very, very challenging. Almost nearly every single chimney that we have looked at has been compromised by the fire that engulfed the house. the mortar and the chemical composition of that mortar has now changed. Most of the chimneys are actually leaning. So they're going to be deemed a public health threat and a threat to the safety of the homeowner. So in all likelihood, a chimney would be taken as part of this process because remember, the original mission is public health. And so I understand the affinity for many of the chimneys in the Altadena area. I know that most of the houses had a chimney. They likely would be removed under our program for public health and safety reasons. And they have been compromised and they're not structurally sound anymore. So that is going to be the case for the vast majority of chimneys. If you have any other flatware, decks, patios, or anything that you don't want us to disturb, we will do everything we can to meet that preference by the homeowner. But that said, we do have heavy equipment, and that heavy equipment has to come on site, and that heavy equipment will have to be utilized to recover that fire ash debris and potentially demolish any other compromised structures. And so we will do everything we can not to harm on the homeowner's behalf, but we cannot guarantee it. The Corps cannot guarantee that a fence would not be affected if it's adjacent to a home and separated by a couple feet, or a deck is adjacent to a foundation that we're taking out. There likely may be some disturbance to those structures. So unfortunately, we cannot provide that guarantee, but we will work with homeowners. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is for the Department of Public Works. For the online ROE form or the one submitted by email or letter, is it possible for there to be a confirmation that the ROE was received? And once the form is submitted, when will we have an idea of the timeline for debris clearance?
Yes, I can take that one. So yes, there is a confirmation from when the online form is submitted. You should get a response with a confirmation number. For the email responses, you should also get a response back as well. And then for the in-person submittals, you submit a receipt at the DRCs that we fill out with you. We are assigning the ROEs to case managers who are reviewing them now for completeness, and you should be hearing back within the next few weeks about any additional documents that may need to be submitted as part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question for you. What process do property owners need to take if they opt out? Are permits required? And what is the real estimate of costs?
Yeah, good question. So there is an opt-out process, and you will be able to pull a permit through our Epic LA system in order to use a private contractor in order to remove debris from your property. So we'll be releasing more information about that process on recovery.lacounty.gov. And part of the process will include a certified asbestos inspection report from a certified asbestos consultant. So that's one thing that folks can get started with now, is to get a certified asbestos consultant report for their property in order to show that there's no asbestos on site. And then if there is asbestos, it will need to be abated before any debris removal activities can occur. So we'll be putting more information up on recovery.lacounty.gov this week about that permit process and how you can proceed with going through that process. And one of the first things we need to do at Public Works on our side is we do an ownership verification, even for those opt-out forms as well. So once that ownership verification is confirmed, and then you'll be able to go through that permit process. Regarding the cost, just to answer the question fully regarding the cost, it's really going to be dependent on a lot of variables and factors unique to each property. And so it's going to depend on what work you elect to do in terms of foundation removal or not, and what the contractor's pricing is for that. So you're going to want to get quotes for that from your contractor in order to determine costs.
Thank you. And when will permit fees be waived for Eaton Fire repair and rebuilds? As of last week, Public Works was still charging permit fees of Altadena residents making repairs that required permits. Will fees be paid so far be refunded?
I'm happy to answer that question on behalf of all the permitting departments. Again, I'm Amy Bodak, the Director of Regional Planning. The Board of Supervisors on January 28th directed the departments, to the 4 permitting departments, to report back within 30 days of what an estimate of the fees would be. And they would then consider whether or not there's the ability to waive those fees. It is a challenge for the departments do not actually have that authority to waive the fees, only the Board of Supervisors does. And that is why they're actually waiting for that information back. All 4 departments are submitting that report back by the February 28th. And if the Board of Supervisors determines that they intend to waive fees and someone has already paid their fees, then we would reimburse you. But until that time that decision is made, all 4 permitting departments will be paying for or collecting those fees. It should be noted, though, that those fees are reimbursable through your private insurance. So you do need to take that into consideration and keep all your receipts, because if we don't end up waiving those fees, you can certainly get them as an eligible expense for your insurance company.
Thank you, Director Bodek. The next question is again for Public Works. Are there plans in place to replace septic tanks and connect them to local sewer lines? Will septic tanks be removed from fire damaged properties even though they're underground?
Yes, so septic tanks are not included in the debris removal process by Army Corps. So if residents are interested in removing their septic tanks, that would have to be done separately. We are looking at the distribution of the septic tanks along with our public health partners and looking for opportunities to expand the sewer system and allow owners to make connections to that system. So that's definitely something that's under consideration. And if owners are interested in connecting to the sewer system, then they should absolutely inquire as part of the rebuilding process and see what the availability is of the nearest local sewer system to be able to make that connection.
Thank you. And again, for Public Works, what is going to be done about pools on total loss properties? Who will drain the toxic sludge in our pools? Who will remove the porous concrete and plaster? And why does the debris removal website say pools will not be included? For those of us with homes still standing, how do we go about cleaning or draining the pools?
Sure. So maybe I can take the first part of that, and then I'll turn it over to Colonel Saucer to talk a little bit about how the Corps uses the pool water in their process. Pools are not removed as part of the debris removal process. If you do have a standing home and your pool has dirty water in it, there is guidance on Public Health's website about some of the best ways to go about cleaning that pool water without actually having to drain the entire pool. If for some reason you're interested in draining the pool, it is doable. We ask that you connect to the local sewer system to drain the pool and make sure that you remove any floating objects or any large pieces of material from that before you do that, as it drains down to the sewer system. So the Army Corps' process is meant for pools that are adjacent to that ash footprint as previously described. So I'll turn it over to Colonel Saucer to talk a little bit more about what they are able to do in regards to those particular pools.
Yeah, so for existing pools that are adjacent to destroyed property, with the concurrence of the homeowner, we are able to utilize that existing water, although polluted. We can use that water for the wet method as we inundate the ash footprint with water. And so we bring external water sources with us because in many cases, and in most cases, there will not be a pool that we can utilize. But in the cases that there is a pool that we can utilize that water that is remaining in there usually, and for the most part, during our wet methods process before we start collecting the debris. So it is helpful, I think, for all parties involved. And that is a partial answer to the question.
Thank you. And a question for both Public Works and Army Corps. Why can't soil tack be used to seal in the debris while phase 2 is undertaken?
Colonel Saucer, I'm not sure if you have a thought on that. My understanding is
I-
the material that can be sprayed onto the dust or the ash, soil tech, it's called, soil tack.
Yeah, so we are looking at all possibilities for that. The actual substance that was just described it is part of the consideration that the court is utilizing right now. But in terms of the specifics on how the contractor is going to stabilize the ash footprint beforehand, we have not deemed that as an absolute must. It's not been ruled in or ruled out. But we are working on that with the contractors as we speak.
I would just echo the same for the opt-out process, not ruled in or out.
Thank you. And then this question is specific to trees. We have seen markings painted on many of our trees. Can you clarify exactly what these markings mean? Who is making the markings and what happens next? Will property owners have a say in which trees are to be removed from their properties?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, and Public Works may want to follow. So on the trees, you've seen essentially two organizations begun to go through all the affected neighborhoods. So the EPA does do tree marking as well as they move through, and those markings can be meaning a certain number of things. We're coming through as well. Before we come in for actual debris removal, we perform a site assessment essentially, and that's done largely on the back of the EPA. But in order to expedite this process, in some cases, we've been working simultaneously with EPA on properties. And when we go through a property, we look at trees that are in the ash footprint. Say a tree was a couple feet from a house and it's very much in the ash footprint. We would absolutely deem that tree as unsafe and has been affected by the fire. We do bring an arborist on every single site, and that arborist does have the final say on that tree. Typically, trees in the fire perimeter would be taken out of public health and safety considerations. It's part of the program. And then the trees that are outside of the fire ash debris and that perimeter, those are assessed and then in many cases marked on whether or not that tree does pose a hazard for the homeowner, a hazard for the neighbor, a hazard for the public, potentially to the public way. And in those cases, if an arborist deems that tree as a potential hazard and that tree is more likely than not to not survive over the next 5 years, then we would look to take that tree. Now, in that process, this is still a conversation with the homeowner. This is still a conversation with LA County Public Works. Certainly, Altadena and many of these neighborhoods revere their trees, and rightfully so. Clearly, there's some amazing trees in this neighborhood. We are not on the hunt for trees by any means. We're on the hunt to ensure public safety and health, and that's the parameters by which we look at it. It is, again, a conversation. County's involved in that conversation, the Corps is involved in that conversation, and the homeowners involved in that conversation. But ultimately, it's going to come back to public health and safety, and we'll work with our partners at county on that and the homeowner.
And just to add to that, as the Colonel mentioned, we're working together, discussing that specifically and specifically discussing what options might be available for those trees outside the ash footprint, which may be considered hazardous by the arborist if there's a strong desire from the property owner to retain those trees, and what might be able to be done process-wise to allow that to occur. So still working on that, and more to come on that.
Thank you. Our next question is, in areas where blocks and blocks of homes have been destroyed, it will be necessary for property owners to have their lots surveyed by a licensed land surveyor to determine lot boundaries and set corner monuments. Given the massive extent of the damage in Altadena, is the county considering providing or assisting with this service?
Chris, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer it?
Go ahead. I think you may have the more up-to-date info.
Okay, all right. So yes, the answer is we are absolutely considering it. We're working with Public Works to actually potentially have a contractor come in and reset all survey monuments and survey everything. We are still in those discussions right now, but that is something that we are trying to do. Similarly, Planning Department is actually going to be issuing a single certificate of compliance for the majority of Altadena properties. This is necessary to ensure that your parcel was properly subdivided. The majority of parcels in Altadena were properly subdivided, and you can tell that because they were from a traditional grid system that dates back to the 1920s. But if it's a newer subdivision or there were more private homes on private streets, we may have to do a little bit more work to ensure that that lot that was created in accordance with the state's Subdivision Map Act. So both the surveying and the reestablishment of survey monuments is expected to be done at the community scale. And then the same with making sure that your parcel was legally established through the subdivision process. We'll be doing that as well on the community scale. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question, I believe Director Bodek, this would be for you. Why is the county attempting to make SB9 lot splitting illegal when it could help multi-generational families with large lots stay on their lot?
So that is actually a misconception. We are not interested in removing the SB9 ability. We specifically were looking at whether SB9 should be a solution in the mapped very high fire hazard severity zones. So it is not across the board that we were asking for consideration by the state to remove SB9 as an option. In fact, that's not the case. SB9 is available to homeowners in Altadena today, and we expect that it will be available to homeowners in Altadena. The specific request that was presented to the board was to ask the state if they would allow us to preclude SB9 in the mapped fire zones, because that is where we are trying to decrease density and decrease the population. However, in the majority of Altadena, you are not in the mapped very high fire hazard severity zone, and so SB9 is available and still applies. I hope that answers those questions.
Yes, thank you. And a few questions from folks who would like to live on their properties, either in ADUs or tiny homes, while they're waiting for rebuilding to begin. Do I still have to go through the long process? How big can I build an ADU and not have my property reassessed? And is it possible, once my land is cleared, that I can place a tiny house there until my house is rebuilt?
A lot of ADU questions, which is understandable. So let me start with a couple of scenarios. Let's say there was an ADU on the property and the ADU survived and the primary residence did not. You can utilize that ADU to live in while you rebuild your home, provided that the debris removal has occurred and that it is cleared of debris in a 100-foot radius from that ADU. So let's say your property was cleared of debris, but your neighbor's property was not yet cleared of debris. We would suggest and strongly urge that you not live in that ADU until debris has been removed at least 100 feet away in all directions from that ADU. So yes, you could live there on site while your primary dwelling is rebuilt. The second question or scenario is, can you build an ADU prior to your primary house and use it as temporary housing, but then the ADU just remains permanent after you move into your primary house? Again, the answer is yes. We would issue you a permit for construction for that ADU, and we are required by state law to approve that ADU within 60 days. And so you would be allowed to get that ADU approved within 60 days. We would ask that you apply for a temporary housing permit related to that ADU to make sure that you are not going to live there permanently and never rebuild your primary home. But then when you rebuild your primary home, you can repurpose that ADU for anything that you would like to do. The third question was related to the whether or not an ADU is going to trigger a reassessment of your property. And I honestly can't answer that question. But since at the Altadena DRC, regional planning is directly outside of the assessor's office, you could actually talk to both of those offices at the same time when you come into the DRC. Third question or fourth question was related to the size of that ADU. Off the top of my head, I believe the ADU can be up to 1,500 square feet, provided that you obviously have a large enough lot that can accommodate that. But then there's also a ratio of that ADU to the square footage of your primary home, and we would allow one or two of those various sizes. The other option that you can do is you can get an 800 square foot ADU approved very, very quickly without having to do too much work if you were to get a prefabricated ADU or a modular ADU that becomes permanent. You can also utilize those resources as your temporary living facility while you are reconstructing your primary home. Those are all the longer answers, but my short answer is come talk to us at the DRC and we can get much more specific. We can pull up your parcel on our computer and we can walk you through the various options that you might be considering. Thank you.
And we've already reached out to the assessor on that. That's a very good question. And we're gonna hopefully have an answer before the end of this session.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Budek. And as homeowners prepare to work with architects for plans and the permitting process, what do they need to know in order to expedite it? Are there plan requirements that need to be met in order to qualify for fast track approval?
So the fast track approval is really if you're going to rebuild, and we're calling it like for like rebuild, but let me clarify this. A like for like rebuild is your existing square footage. So if you had a 1,500 square foot home and it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath with a large family room and a dining room, and you decide you don't want to have a dining room anymore, but you want to build a 3-bedroom, 2-bath within a 1,500 square foot footprint, the answer is that's a like for like rebuild. We're interested in the square footage, not how you utilize that square footage on the interior. A like for like rebuild plus a 10% overage to accommodate new code requirements is considered like for like and will be fast tracked through these processes. If you inherited a home or you live in a smaller home and you want to make more changes and you want to increase the size of your home, that would not be considered a like for like rebuild. However, you will be getting consideration because it is a rebuild in general, and we will have the dedicated rebuilding teams focus on those applications, and so that you are not in the queue with the rest of the county. For consideration of how to advise your architect should, or your professional, your design professional, should also visit us at the DRC. The DRC is not just for residents. It is for the design professionals as well. And we've had many architects and engineers visit us. And additionally, Public Works is holding a forum specifically for design individuals this week on Thursday afternoon. The first session is sold out. They did require reservations, but they have some opportunities for a second and third forum on Friday afternoon at the Department of Public Works, where your design professional can come in and get some of those questions answered additionally. Happy to answer any more questions related to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Budek. And one more question for you regarding zoning and regulation going forward. How can we ensure that future homes that are built are less prone to fire damage, but without these requirements adding expenses to those who can already not afford a rebuild?
That's a really excellent question, and that's something that we've been struggling with, frankly, to make sure that rebuilding occurs as quickly as possible and as efficiently and I don't want to say cheaply, but as inexpensive as possible for the individual. The Board of Supervisors actually asked the state to consider waiving certain code requirements. Regardless of what the governor's office and the state does, there are certainly minimum code standards that must be met by all rebuilds, and those just have to be met. What we're talking to the state about is providing incentives and rebates to lower the cost of certain of those incentives, or excuse me, certain of those requirements. But by virtue of being a newer home, that home is going to be much more resilient than the older home that you might have lost in the fire. Additionally, there are going to be, if you are in that mapped very high fire hazard severity zone, there are going to be landscape standards that are going to you're going to have to comply with. And lastly, my department is working with the Department of the Office of Chief Sustainability and the Department of Public Works to provide a resource guide on how to make homes more resilient. And so that homeowners actually have options to go above and beyond the code so that they can provide the most resilience that they can. From a community scale, we're going to be working with the Altadena Commission that the supervisor has set up to determine what kind of community scale infrastructure we need to apply to all of Altadena to make Altadena much more resistant to future fires. Those can include things like fire breaks, but it can include things like redundant power sources, and other options like that. Those are still in the exploratory stages, but that is something that we are very interested in to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you. And then we have one general question. I don't have time to wait for EPA or the Army Corps. I'm hiring my own contractor now. What forms do I need to fill out?
That is definitely for Public Works.
Thank you. Yeah, so there will be, as I said earlier, there will be a process for opting out. The first form to fill out is the opt-out form online. So the first thing we'd ask you to do is go to recovery.lacounty.gov, fill out the opt-out form to say you're opting out of the Army Corps program to remove debris, and then you will be required to have phase 1 done on your property before you pull a permit, unless your property is deferred to phase 2. If your property is deferred to phase 2 and you opt out, then you will be responsible for the hazardous waste removal on your own property. And so part of the process, the permit process for approval, is identifying the contractors that you will use for that process, which include appropriately certified contractors that have the hazardous waste certification and are licensed by the state. So as I mentioned earlier, you can get started right now in terms of looking at a certified asbestos consultant to do a certified asbestos consultant report for the property in order to determine if there's any asbestos on site. And more information will be coming shortly this week about the permit process and how to go through and actually register through our Epic LA portal to get that permit review done, which is a very quick and streamlined process, as mentioned.
What's quick? I was going to ask Chris. I think she's saying she wants to do it now. So what is the turnaround? Because I think that's really what her question is. If EPA is going to EPA has to go onto each piece of property and sign off on it. They're going to be done in 30 days. They may have already done his or her property, but what is the turnaround once that's done for you?
So actually, we're looking at auto issue permit. So once you submit and upload all the required documentation to the system, then the permit's good to go. On our end, we will be checking to make sure that the CAC report submitted is a valid CAC report and shows no asbestos. If it doesn't, you may get a notice to stop until all the abatement's done and you actually turn in the approved reports. but at least initially,
It's a certified, if someone's certified, then it should not be problematic.
exactly, that's
Okay.
correct.
Colonel, did you want to add anything? I see your hand raised.
Yeah, Supervisor, if you don't mind, I do appreciate the opportunity to respond to that as well. Just for the public's awareness. So as the EPA is going through their clearance, yes, 100% correct. They're targeting the end of February to be complete with their clearance, but there are a certain percentage of properties which are deemed deferred. So a property for instance, that has some hazards on the site that does not allow for personnel to walk onto the site and manually retrieve household hazardous materials, the EPA then defers those properties to the Corps. So there will be carryover properties past the end of this month for household hazardous material removal that have been deferred to the Corps.
Thank you, everyone, for the very thorough response there. We're going to transition quickly to some questions for our public health. Dr. Nicole Quick is on. Dr. Quick, what guidance is there for individuals who live in the impacted area and did not lose their home? Is it safe to return to our home when homes on our streets were destroyed? And is it safe to be there when debris is removed on our street?
Yes,
Why-
thank you.
And does the county have plans to declare the impacted area unsafe to be in?
Thank you for those questions. And we've been getting a lot of questions about that. Let me provide a little bit of background, and I really want to point people to the LA County Department of Public Health website. We have a lot of information on there in the form of FAQs, and it's sort of, it is organized now for individuals who are in the burn area, individuals who are adjacent to burn area, and those that might be within the burn area and have a home that is still standing. So we have a ton of information there for people to reference to try to get at this. Couple of broad thoughts about this, however. We do know that the fire debris is hazardous. Everything that was in your homes that burned, there can be toxins in there that we want folks to stay away from. So for some individuals, if their home is standing within a burn area, it may be advisable for those people to stay out of their homes until phase 2 is completed for the surrounding areas, because you may be reintroducing some of those toxins into your home, tracking it inside, and so forth. I think for an individual looking at their home, whether that be a home that is within the burn area and still standing or adjacent to a burn area, some of the things that we want people to be aware of is essentially visually inspecting that. That may be the outside of the home, inside of the home, and you're looking for significant fire debris, ash, and soot. If that is present, it needs to be cleaned up appropriately, and people undertaking that cleaning need to have appropriate personal protective equipment on. I'm not going to go too in depth on that because I know we're nearing time here, but I would urge folks to go to our website to get more information on that. I will say, once your house has been cleaned, if it's heavily contaminated and or you cleaned it and you're still seeing fire debris and or smelling smoke, that's a time to get in an expert to help with that remediation. Check first with insurance. There may be contracted individuals with your insurance. If you're going to go out on your own and get somebody in to do that remediation, make sure those people are licensed and insured. And I would also recommend checking for references on those. So those are some of the broad things I would say about that, but really urge people to go to our website and look at the FAQs for each of those 3 sort of situations that you may find yourself in.
So Dr. Quick, I have two issues. One is Amy said 100 feet for safety if we're doing a tiny home or living on that property. So I want to align that discrepancy, because you're saying that it's not safe to go in the home. So you all are saying the same thing, but are we communicating with the Department of Insurance, who is telling people, the insurance companies are telling homeowners that they can move back into their home before the debris removal takes place? I think if it's a public health issue, then I think we need to talk to the Department of Insurance and have a public health order so that insurance companies can't mandate that people move back in until the debris removal is done. So that I know there's people on this call that have asked that question. So we need to get a discrepancy, because Amy's saying the same thing. If it's within 100 feet and there's still debris, it's not safe. Correct, Amy? Okay. So for the next briefing, we will get that cleared up, because that's an important point, and I appreciate that, Dr. Quick.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question, and that's for the EPA. Can you tell us how you are handling the removal and transport of household hazardous materials in phase 1, and specifically the use of Farnsworth Park and the Altadena Golf Course for these efforts?
Well, if EPA is not on, I will tell you that Farnsworth is phase 2 because they ran out of space at Lario. And I know that right now we are checking, because I know a press release went out regarding using Altadena Golf Course. My understanding is that Altadena Golf Course is only going to be used for phase 2 debris removal as a staging area, and that EPA, and I've told my staff this, is more than welcome to use it for staging for staff. But Farnsworth, the lower part of Farnsworth, is for EPA because they ran out of space at Lario. And look, I understand everyone's concerns about hazardous waste, but this is paint, this is lithium batteries, and quite frankly, I want to get it done. And the less we move it, the quicker it gets done. And so I think Farnsworth Park is an ideal location right now for the second staging area that they're going to put in play. But on Altadena Golf Course, I am still waiting for the facts because I have concerns about that if we're using it for phase 2 debris removal. So again, we will have more information for you on that moving forward.
Thank you, Supervisor. And that is all the time that we have for questions today. For more information, please visit recovery.lacounty.gov/Altadena or visit your local disaster recovery center. As a reminder, you can find answers to frequently asked questions on recovery.lacounty.gov/Altadena. We will be back next week for another community meeting. Thank you, everyone.